Can you ever truly forgive somebody? The answer is yes, but it's a very patient process. You can't force the transformation of deep suffering into deep compassion, but we do need to find practical ways to try and salvage some sense of hope and humanity from an atmosphere of death and decay. Today we're filming in an 800-year-old church in the west of England, and it's impossible to step into a ruined place of worship and not feel this balance between faith and fragility. We're not the first people to wrestle with the weight of forgiveness, and we certainly won't be the last. And the history here really does feel like the most appropriate setting for this kind of deep moral question. So let me read you today's prompting question from Peggy as part of the Inner Work Question series. Wonderful, nuanced issue here, so I hope you enjoy this. Thank you, Peggy, for the question. Peggy asked, I have made the decision to forgive and forget the individuals who have caused me mental and emotional trauma in the past. However, my heart is not willing to reconcile with them. Despite this, these individuals are acting as if nothing has happened and are attempting to reconnect with me. I'm unsure of whether or not I should communicate with them, should I engage with them in any way, or should I maintain a distance? The reason I chose that question for today's video is although I receive this kind of invitation to talk about forgiveness very often, there's something about Peggy's duality between having partially forgiven and not being in the active state of being upset or resentful or vindictive or vengeful, but not yet having a heart involved in the forgiveness process. I think when we typically think of forgiveness, we try to imagine that we should be 100% on board with our emotional conviction. It's a very proper black or white, have you forgiven them or have you not forgiven them? But the truth that I've learned along this journey is that forgiveness really operates along a spectrum, and sometimes it takes many years. You put forgiveness as the final outcome, but forgiveness is also the verb. It's also the process. It's both things at once. And it really depends upon the situation in regards to should you even forgive somebody. If it's a stranger or a casual friend who's betrayed you in a massive way and you haven't got the investment, maybe you just let them show their colors and you turn away. If it's somebody who's very close to you, you naturally want to try and repair that relationship. But how can we do that when the wounds have been so deep? Well, I think it would be a shame to be in a wonderful place like this and not make use of the 1840s Bible over there on the table. So let's go take a wander over and show you some of this beautiful architecture that we've got. I selected a quote from Matthew, Gospel of Matthew. I think it's verse 21, and yeah, it's written in Old English, which is particularly interesting. If you've never read a truly Old English Bible, this is going to be a moment where you'll see. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times. Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7, which is a very complex way of saying, look, Peter, you can't just forgive them 7 times, you need to forgive them 77 times. And the literal number is not what I want you to focus on. It's the principle of trying to repeatedly forgive and moving towards that process in a way where you know it's in chapters of forgiveness. I don't think the Bible is referring to forgiveness being an endpoint, because either Peter's in a particularly toxic relationship with his local Jewish neighbor, and he keeps stealing his possessions, and he's like, I've got to forgive him again. It's more likely that there's a deeper principle that's being alluded to. And I think it's the idea that you'll never finish forgiving. You may finish forgiving with one individual person. You might get over a betrayal of trust. Say, for example, there's been cheating in a relationship or a friend has stolen money from you. You might forgive that in the moment, but you don't forget the wound. I think a true betrayal, a true hurt, can never truly be forgiven in the sense that your heart won't feel some of the scar tissue. In Peggy's question, she said that her heart isn't fully willing to reconcile. And I think that's the small, subtle emotional gap which we really need to draw attention to. It's never going to be fully healed. We might get towards the final percentage point, but there's always going to be weight. There's always going to be damage. And it's a genuinely religious effort to try and continually forgive 77 times, to have that moment where you feel the weight and you remember what they did, and it comes up as a 10-second burst of sadness, an intrusive memory, you haven't thought about it in 6 months. Will you forgive? Will you forgive in that moment? And that's the inner work of forgiveness. But how do we take this towards the outer work of actually repairing our relationships? Again, it depends on safety. For certain people, you may need to take a long distance away from a certain relationship before you can be even willing to begin the process of forgiveness. And for other people, they'll be able to start right away. You normally need some distance though, especially if it's family, especially if it's someone that you're dating or a very close friend. You can't just leap into the process. It's a little premature, but it is possible. Fundamentally though, they have to be willing. You can't externalize that interior feeling of forgiveness. And what I mean by that is you can't actually repair the relationship with the person if they're not open to the conversations. And Peggy's in a situation where the person who's close to her isn't willing to even acknowledge what they've done is a bad thing. I don't know what the situation is, but we all know people like this who very much brush off and deny that they've done anything wrong when clearly they're doing quite a bit which is unsavory. I don't know if you can truly forgive that person. And that's a really difficult thing to say. You can heal deeply in your heart and you can find a sense of peace, which hopefully means that you won't be angsty and bitter and holding on to the hot coal and burning yourself. But if you're not willing to repair in the sense of being with that person, maybe for the 10 years that they need of constant conversation, or the 10 years of awkward distance and awkward tension, before they finally realize, hey, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. That's the big question. Are you willing to wait it out? Are you willing to endure the tension, the perpetual tension of them genuinely not owning up, genuinely not taking responsibility for their actions? And do you want to lock yourself into that loop of forgiving 77 times as you wait, hopefully, for the moment when they'll send you the text or they'll call out of the blue and you'll hear the words, I'm sorry? I can't make that decision for you. I've been hurt in my life. I've been betrayed in my life. And fortunately, those moments where I've been hurt the most has always been with people who I've been willing to talk with, and they've been willing to talk with me. And the relationship can repair. It doesn't happen quickly, but it can happen. But the distinguishing factor, once more, they need to be willing to accept forgiveness. And for them to be willing to accept the forgiveness, they need to understand that they've done something wrong, which is being actively forgiven. Otherwise, they won't understand the hurt that you've gone through. They won't understand the effort that you've been through to actually get to that final point of embracing them again. Can you repair the relationships? Yes, but a relationship is always at least two people. It's your internal world, it's their internal world, and it's the third thing between the two of you. You can step forwards, you can step backwards, but they better match your pace. The final liberation I can offer, making use of this wonderful space, is to really have the choice. It might be a biblical moral ideal to turn the other cheek and take the blow and come back, to be willing to take another in this process of forgiveness. But I want to close this video off saying, you don't need to prematurely forgive someone who significantly hurt you. I wouldn't advise that you get vengeful. I wouldn't advise that you take physical action to hurt that person in an eye for an eye kind of way. But you don't have to forgive someone if they've abused you, especially if it's particularly intense abuse. That's your choice. It's not mandatory. You might get there, you might not get there. Generally speaking, you'll release the weight from your heart if you do forgive them. But for Peggy in particular, where she feels like she's forgiven, but her heart isn't fully involved, that still might be the best possible outcome. You may never fully get the closure, and that's almost an anticlimactic way to end the video. It's almost disappointing to be saying that you just might not get it, but I think it's the honest reality. I'm not here to lie to you or give you false hope when it's an atmosphere of damage and decay. It's really unknown, and that's the truth of the human condition. I hope this conversation, at the very least, has inspired some reflection, and maybe it's the 72nd time that you'll forgive someone, and on the 73rd, it will all click. It also might not be. That's the truth. I hope it's been useful nonetheless. I'll see you over in the next video, where we're going to cover even more dark topics, probably in less atmospheric places. We'll be back in the library, and I'll see you over there.